afternoon. My name is Will Cunningham, and you are now tuned in to the AMEDD Effect. Today on the show, we have Chaplain Torres here to discuss her journey as an Army chaplain and the different things that she has done in her career within the United States Army. But before we get started, let me give you a brief background on Chaplain Torres. Chaplain Torres joined the U.S. Army in 2001 as a military intelligence officer. During her time in the U.S. Army, she would do a tour in Iraq. Upon her return home from Iraq, Chaplain Torres felt called to serve the U.S. Army in a different capacity. That will become an Army chaplain. So today, we're going to talk to Chaplain Christie Torres about her experience and her journey in the U.S. Army as a chaplain. So everybody, please give Chaplain Torres a warm welcome. Good afternoon, Chaplain Torres. How has things been going for you today? And is the weather in Kentucky any different than the weather in the Windy City?
It's totally different. I mean, last week in the Chicago area it was about 11 degrees, so I'm really enjoying the warm here. So, yeah, I'm doing well.
Yeah, that Kentucky weather, sometimes you just really never know what it's going to be. Sometimes it's going to be cold in the morning, then later on it'll warm up, so you just never really know. But glad that the weather is probably tad bit better than the Windy City. And for you all who don't know, the Windy City is Chicago, Illinois, so we just want to put that portion out there. Now, you're here on Fort Knox. What are you in town for? What are you currently down here doing?
Yes, they have the Chaplain Recruiter Sustainment Training. So 3 days. Mm-hmm. So it's just learning all the processes for recruiting and prospecting. So that's what I'm here for. But also to help the recruiting mission specifically with this podcast initiative. So I commend you, Mr. Cunningham.
Thank you. This is definitely something that I have been talking about for a while. So it's great to have you on the show as one of our first guests and help us kick this off, because the main thing that we talk about is recruiting within the U.S. Army, and recruiting is a major part of it. So that's what we want to do. We want to spread the word and get the word out about Army recruiting. So, recruiting is a major priority when it comes to the U.S. Army, and the AMEDD Effect is here to help. This podcast is designed to spread the word about Army opportunities within the Army Medical Department and Army Chaplaincy. Army chaplains in the U.S. Army care for the spiritual, moral, and emotional well-being of the Army and make it stronger from the inside out. Before we get started with the show, we are going to take a quick break. You guys hear this from our sponsors.
Since 1775, Army chaplains have acted as spiritual counselors who support, motivate, and provide emotional guidance to soldiers and their families. We are looking for chaplains to care for spiritual, moral, and emotional well-being of the Army. Follow your calling as an Army chaplain. Visit goarmy.com/chaplain. for more information or to speak with one of our virtual recruiters today.
You're currently an Army chaplain recruiter in the Chicago, Illinois area. While you're there, you visit various Bible colleges, attend different events to talk to potential students who may want to become chaplains within the Army. Without me saying too much, let you do some more explaining so people can have a better understanding of what is going on. Could you let the viewers and listeners know what are the primary roles of U.S. Army chaplains?
So the primary role for the U.S. Army Chaplaincy is to provide religious support to soldiers assigned to them and their families. And then from that religious support, the chaplain and really their 56 Mike, which is a religious affairs specialist, they serve in an advisory capacity to the commanders. So they advise the commander, he or she, right, on everything pertaining to ethics, moral, religion, what that unit ministry team is seeing in the formation. So those are the two primary responsibilities for a chaplain in the United States Army.
Now, not everyone is familiar with the ins and out of how the Army works. Could you explain how the roles of a U.S. Army chaplain differ from a civilian religious leader?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mr. Cunningham. So what I tell people who are interested in Army chaplaincy, the Army is it is the largest branch in the Department of Defense, and our Army's mission is to fight and win our nation's wars. So that in itself is a distinctly different mission compared to a clergy. So in the civilian setting, so an Army chaplain will enable warfighters to fight and win our nation's wars. So that's what I would say is a very distinctive feature.
Great way to answer that. And I know that having a chaplain there during that wartime is definitely needed. And soldiers love to have that there so they can have that somebody who can come and speak with them spiritually and keep them focused and keep them moving ahead for the mission ahead. Now, you have served as a chaplain for different units. Talk about the many ways you and other chaplains make a difference within the U.S. Army.
Yeah, most of my experience as an Army chaplain has been in Forces Command, Armed Forces Command, FORSCOM. And so in these assignments, it really was to provide religious support to service members and their families. And the religious support looked a lot like pastoral care and counseling. The Army's a profession of war, and in these assignments that I've served in, they were responding to the global crisis that our military has had to respond to. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the 101st Airborne Division responded to in the past 36 months there was the COVID, and then the vax mandate, and then Afghanistan withdrawal, and then the thing in Ukraine, and so it was a very high crisis type of environment. And soldiers are not human. Soldiers are not robots. They are human beings,
right.
And they're brave human beings. But as humans, they have emotional responses to something, to events like that. Mm-hmm. And it could be anxiety, it could be fear, it could be, what does my future look like in a crisis situation. And so chaplains are uniquely positioned to provide comfort, to provide hope, to provide care in those times where it's uncertain. And I say that because chaplains are clergy. And so they're clergy in the military capacity. And they have and I know that's kind of a biased perspective, but they're representing not just the Army, they're representing their endorsing body, the denomination that has allowed them to be represented in the military. And so, there is we say pro dea patria, for God and country. And so we have that unique perspective where if it's uncertain, hey, for me as a Christian chaplain, hey, the God of hope is going to protect you in the midst of this uncertainty. And so that's what I believe is, how chaplains provide care in such a kind of a tumultuous environment.
Right. Yeah. So let me ask you this: when you all do deploy, is there only one chaplain per unit, or how many chaplains normally deploy with you all? Are there multiple ones, or are there just one chaplain there to assist with the entire unit?
Yeah. So it depends where. At what level. Mm-hmm. But brand new chaplains, right? I tell interested, whether it's seminary students or clergy, you will start out in the battalion. And the battalion formation typically ranges between 650 to up to 1,000 soldiers. And there's one chaplain for that battalion. Okay. And you're also supporting their families. So you could have 650 soldiers, but you could also minimally have maybe 1,000, and you are the one chaplain to that formation.
Okay, understood. So there is There is a lot. It could potentially be a lot for those chaplains when dealing with crisis and having to go out and talk to soldiers and their family members.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So how does the U.S. Army support the religious diversity among the chaplains? Because I know there's soldiers who come from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different beliefs. So how does the U.S. Army accommodate that?
Yeah, so I go back to the core responsibility was just to provide religious support. And so if a service member or their family member is of a different faith tradition than mine, my job, my responsibility is to find the support they need. Similar to our battalion is very phenomenal at providing support based on their expertise. So if I'm not able to accommodate that spiritual need, I do my best to find, whatever their religious support needs may be. So if they need a Catholic priest, we talk, request, make the resourcing requirement known in the installation for a Catholic priest. And then if we're in an environment where there really is no other chaplain but me, I tread very carefully, but I just really, it's meeting the service member where they are. So, I've been in counseling sessions where, the family member did not want to hear anything about God. She was, went through a significant loss in her life, and she didn't feel like God was in the picture. And so I just had to meet that family member where she was.
Right.
It would have been unwise to keep saying, well, God this, God that.
Right.
And so I say this because that's really, when you look at the religious composition of the United States Army, I speak specifically for active duty, I mean, it's similar to the population for the United States. And so our young adult population, there isn't perhaps a specific faith tradition. And so that's, and so as a chaplain going into a formation that's maybe predominantly young adults, I have to be mindful of that. So how can I provide support and still be relevant for him or her, still provide the spiritual care they need to get back? I love what one of my commanders said, like, empower my soldiers to get back in the fight. And, too often it is, somebody will need a chaplain in a very vulnerable moment in their lives. Most people aren't calling for chaplains when things are so phenomenal. But I'm just there to provide care for that soldier or their family member.
Got you. Understood. So the job as you all can tell, the job of a chaplain is very intense. It's a lot of things that they do, and it's a lot of services that they provide for soldiers and their family members. Now, as a recruiter, one of the things that you do, you go out to different seminaries, different Bible colleges, and you talk to students. Now, the one thing that we always hear is about paying for education. Now, before we talk about the paying of education, could you detail what education and training requirements are necessary to become a chaplain in the U.S. Army?
Yes, Mr. Cunningham, great question. So you need minimally a 4-year education and then your Master's of Divinity from an accredited theological seminary. So we say a Master's of Divinity, and then sometimes, depending on the faith tradition, it's not a Master's of Divinity. So it's minimum 72 semester credit hours in the relevant theological degree.
Okay.
So, and then you also need 2 years full-time clergy experience, professional, full-time, and that your denomination supports. And that experience has to be after you're granted the Master's of Divinity. And then you need to be represented, endorsed, and ordained by a denomination that the DoD recognizes. And then that denomination has their own requirements. And then you also have to be medically qualified, and fitness-wise. The military has its requirements.
Right. Okay. So different requirements, still have to have one of those, still need a degree, still need all of the education, then come in, and I'm pretty sure it's some extra training that comes with that as well. Now, we talked about paying for education. Now, we didn't get into that. We didn't get fully into it. But there is the Chaplain Candidate Program. Can you give some details about the benefits and incentives of that program for those who may be interested in joining the Army as a chaplain?
Yep. I was a chaplain candidate, and so if you're contemplating that program, I highly recommend it. So the Chaplain Candidate Program is intended to really provide, one, for you to meet the requirements for Army Chaplaincy. Because as you know, when you do the math, it's after being granted your bachelor's degree, it's like minimally 5 years after that process.
Okay.
So you're being coached, trained, developed by ideally a senior chaplain in the Army Reserve. You report to battle assembly, or what they call drill, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. And that typically, ideally, that senior chaplain is mentoring you. And you're exposed to what military chaplaincy looks like in the reserve setting. You're wearing the uniform, you're a commissioned officer. And you see what chapel services look like on the weekends in an Army Reserve environment. And then you could also be asked to go to what they call paid practicums. I use kind of the equivalent of maybe an internship, although it's not an internship, but they have summer paid practicums at West Point, at Fort Knox. I was, asked to go to West Point, and that's the United States Military Academy in New York.
Okay.
And it was a great experience. And so I learned how to serve cadets and just do pretty rigorous training with them that summer. I highly recommend the Chaplain Candidate Program. I believe it gives people an edge into what the military looks like, and then for their preparation as a future Army chaplain.
Does the program provide 100% paid tuition? How does that work?
So what the program does provide is the tuition assistance.
Okay.
So $4,500 per year towards your degree, your Master's of Divinity. And then if a chaplain decides to assess into the Army Reserve, they have the Chaplain Loan Repayment Program of up to $40,000. And that's an accession of 6 years into the Army Reserve.
Okay. Now, something you spoke on, you talked about the Army Reserves. So I want to ask you this question. Could you talk about the difference in joining the military as a full-time active duty chaplain versus as a becoming a chaplain and being in the reserves?
Yeah, and so I've never been an Army Reserve chaplain, but in speaking with my colleague, and it's like the Army. What the biggest draw is, what I'm seeing for the Army Reserve chaplaincy is that these pastors, these chaplains, are able to fulfill their civilian ministry, interests, and it provides them stability in an area if that's what they want, and so, yeah, that's kind of the clear distinction. Okay.
Now, you also spoke about how you talk to soldiers during crisis. You talk to their family members as well, and you deal with both. You deal with both aspects of that, both sides of it. So, would you say that taking extra courses, maybe like some counseling courses, would be something that is also beneficial for somebody who comes in to become a chaplain, because you're dealing with those family members and the different things that they have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Clinical pastoral education, although it's not required to assess as an Army chaplain, I took CPE, and it was just so beneficial for the amount of counselings that I ended up doing in the battalion level. I mean, you think about it, you are one chaplain to a battalion. Mm-hmm. And so a majority of my work was counseling, pastoral care and counseling. And so if you can gear your training towards more exposure, towards how, effective counseling, and just, I think you're going to be set up well.
Are you looking to pursue a successful healthcare career at one of the largest and most advanced medical facilities in the country? If so, look no further. The U.S. Army is here. Visit goarmy.com/AMEDD to learn how you can serve soldiers, their families, military retirees, and at times the general public while providing meaningful service.
You guys, it's your host, Will Cunningham, and welcome back to the AMEDD Effect. We are here with Chaplain Torres, and we're talking about Army Chaplaincy within the U.S. Army. Let's get right back to the show. Can you discuss the benefits and opportunities of personal and professional growth that the U.S. Army chaplains receive?
Yeah, there are so many professional development opportunities in the Army Chaplaincy.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's clinical pastoral education, doing a full year of that in the hospital setting, 56 weeks, and then I was told, they're later assigned to a medical unit after that as well. There's the Army Civilian Schooling Program where you can, volunteer for that assignment, and it's you get paid to attend a graduate school that's approved by the Army for a year.
Okay.
And then you do a follow-on assignment to that. There are so many different opportunities in the Army Chaplaincy for somebody's professional development and even leadership development. And then when you say personal development, I've thankfully have served commanders that have been very supportive with my professional and personal development. And so, I'm doing a doctorate right now at a seminary, and, I'm serving leaders that are just supportive of my education.
So you said you're currently in school to get your doctorates?
I'm currently enrolled in a doctorate program, a doctor of ministry.
Let's give Chaplain Torres a round of applause for that, you guys. Yeah, that's good to hear that you're furthering your education and learning more about Army chaplaincy. That's great. I love to hear that.
Yeah, and really, and it's something I learned in the Army, and it's one of their Army regulation is that they promote leaders to pursue lifelong learning, and a big motivating factor is because our enemy is evolving. They're changing. And so as an Army leader, it's your responsibility to evolve and to change and to grow so that you're relevant for the organization.
So earlier we spoke about how there are different individuals, different religious backgrounds. Can you explain how chaplains navigate those challenges, if there are any, when it comes to providing the spiritual guidance to those different soldiers from different backgrounds or different spiritual backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to my initial response, right, the diversity in the Army, just very mindfully, you tread carefully, with wisdom. But I'm always really trying to identify, where is the soldier at? Where is the spouse at? Where is their child at? And what does that person need? And then they're generally aware that I'm coming from a faith tradition. Like, I'm a religious leader. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a social worker.
Right.
So they're going to get a perspective that's unique to it's going to be a spiritual perspective. So, but again, it's not in an imposing manner, but it's with wisdom, and discretion, but also being sensitive to where that person is. Does that make sense?
Yes, it definitely makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yes, it definitely makes sense. I understand exactly where you're coming from. There are multiple people who come in as chaplains as well, so you all are able to provide that spiritual background for them. So if there is somebody that is of a different faith tradition, you can reach out, make a phone call to talk to somebody, and somebody can help you out with that, with dealing with that soldier.
Yeah. And then if there isn't any other chaplain available, I mean, really, it's just caring for that soldier and their family member. And often soldiers just need to be heard.
Right.
They just need a confidential listening ear. And chaplains in their 56 mic is their religious affairs specialist.
Okay.
They have the absolute confidentiality privilege. There's nobody else in the formation that has that. And so a soldier just needs to be heard, really, to be seen. And they need to be valued. in their moment of vulnerability. That's really what a soldier and their family members need.
Right. So would you say that's when that counseling, training, and education also will come into play as well? Because now you can go from being more like from a religious standpoint and just more like a counseling. Let's talk. Give that soldier an opportunity to vent and just get those different things off their chest.
Yep. So yeah, they're processing. You know, they're processing their thoughts, what's happening in their heart, and then the chaplain is positioned to to speak into that.
Okay.
From their professional training.
Okay. Could you tell us the difference between an officer and an enlisted soldier?
I mean, it's one team. I mean, and I don't think one is better than the other at all. I mean, the Army is only as successful as the people of the organization. So when I first entered the Army, I entered as an enlisted soldier, and then right away I contracted into the ROTC program at my undergraduate school, and that was a leadership professional program. But our non-commissioned officers are also leaders, and so the Army is a leadership organization. And I would say the clear distinction is that officers have to provide that vision. They have to cast that vision into their organization. There's this verse in the Bible that a man without vision is going to perish. And so leaders, our senior leaders, have to cast that vision. Where is this organization going? And then our enlisted maybe are kind of running with your vision. And so I think that's how I would respond to that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of different ceremonies that take place. Can you talk about those different ceremonies that chaplains are that they conduct in a military setting?
Yeah, there's memorial operations. So one of the our three main things: we nurture the living, care for the fallen, honor the dead, right? Care for the wounded, and then honor the dead. And so memorials are one of the big ceremonies for the military, and it's very precise on how those memorials are done. They have to be done it's such a sacred moment, and it must be done well, and it must be honoring to the soldier and their family. So there's those ceremonies. There's invocations, benedictions, and other ceremonies. I would say those are the main things.
Now, we kind of talked about it earlier, but I think we talked about it more or less from a soldier standpoint. Can you explain the importance of spiritual support for the family members of soldiers during the time of deployment?
Yeah, and so there's this thing in the Army regulation, unit readiness is a huge component of unit readiness is family readiness, because what's happening in the soldier's family dynamics impacts him or her state of readiness. I mean, I've done maybe 14 strong bonds. Strong bonds were these relational building, family readiness building events. Paid for, by the Army, and we would be, the Army would pay for their lodging at a hotel, meals, everything. But there's a curriculum that the chaplaincy approves of, and so we teach those curriculum in that weekend. So it's really giving them the skills they need to strengthen those relationships prior to deployment. And then we do those events even after deployment. And it's just, strong families it's a ready soldier.
Right.
And then there's a lot of counselings, right? I mean, I've done a lot of marital counselings. And it's how to bridge, how to provide reconciliation in that relational dynamics. And then so marital counselings, but also family counselings. So I've I've had an entire family in my office at some point. And then there's the spiritual events that happen on the weekends, right? There's the religious, the chapel services and the chapels. I mean, unit chaplains also serve at a chapel on post. So that could be during the week, or also ideally maybe on the weekends, Sundays. And so they're providing religious support at the chapel. And then those chapel ministries have their events that they help to strengthen families, to strengthen the service member. So, and it could look like, I've done retreats. We've done, I don't know, like I was a youth pastor at Fort Campbell.
Okay.
And so, and all of these family members, all these children, or these teenagers, all their parents were, in the active Army. So, yeah, it's strengthening, it's providing spiritual support to their families.
Let's talk about what you currently do. So you currently go out and recruit individuals to come do the same thing that you do in the Army. What are some of the things that you hear the most from the students when you talk to them about joining the Army as a chaplain that you would like to dispel?
Yeah, no, great question. So whether it's a seminary student or somebody who's already meeting the requirements, they're clergy, one of the common concern is deployment. What does deployment look like? Will I go to war? Will I be separated from my family? So those are, I would say, have been the predominant, concerns. And I've collaborated with colleagues about this, and I feel really protected being in the military, and I mean that genuinely. I mean, we have, the people to your left and right are very trained individuals in their craft, and so we have high, equipment and weaponry, and you think about that, you're in the midst of that, and so me personally, I felt very protected. And the Army exists, again, to fight and win our nation's wars. And so the Army's training for these wars, if they're to happen. And so, and it's like our Commander-in-Chief's priority, right? Generating lethal teams. Mm-hmm. And so it's just being in an organization that is like training constantly. And so if somebody had a concern about deployment, I would say, one, in my faith tradition, I believe in the strength of God who covers and protects, and then I believe in the power of prayer. And then two, you're going to be in an organization that's highly trained, highly equipped, and in my experience, I have felt protected.
That's great to hear, yeah. And that's something that's great to dispel because, like you said, you are coming in as a chaplain in your specialized position, and you have people who are around you who are specialized in their position to help protect, to make sure that you and everybody else are able to make it back home safely. Yeah. So I understand that 100%. So when you talk about that to those students, is that something that kind of makes them feel a little bit more better, more willing to talk to you more about the opportunities as a chaplain?
Students or a clergy, right? And it's just knowing that you're protected. Like the Army's not going to go into something to lose. Like our leaders are there, and the vision has been to win. And so to win is you train hard. And so I've served in these organizations that train hard and they train to win. And they want to bring their sons and daughters back home safely, right? The sons and daughters of America.
Right.
And that I mean that genuinely, as me being a chaplain who's a non-combatant. And so I have to rely on the person to my left and right to be highly trained in their craft to protect me. And then when you say, back to your question about what is the Army Chaplaincy doing for family readiness, right? Or, the general myth is like, hey, what about my family? And I have a chaplain colleague who's serving in the regiment, and he even said, tell them about how the Army takes care of their families.
let's take another commercial break so we can let our sponsors talk to you all about the different opportunities that the Army Medical Department provides. And we'll be right back with Chaplain Torres. You all, this portion of the podcast is sponsored by the Health Professions Scholarship Program.
Launch your medical career with zero to little debt with the Army's Health Professions Scholarship Program. HPSP is one of the most comprehensive scholarships available in the healthcare field. The Health Professions Scholarship could be great for those pursuing a career in one of these fields: medical, including osteopathy, dental, veterinary, nursing, counseling and clinical psychology, and optometry. For more information, visit goarmy.com/HPSP.
Thank you for that message from our sponsors. You are now tuned in to the AMEDD Effect. I'm your host, Will Cunningham, and we're back here with Chaplain Christie Torres talking about Army Chaplaincy. We were talking about dispelling any myths that they are out there about the military that you would like to dispel when it comes to Army Chaplaincy.
Yeah, and so another concern is like, will I be separated from my families? And how does that look like having a family in the Army? So I've never been married. I don't have children. I do have a dog, right? But I've served
family
many
member.
people. I have many friends. I've served many people who have families, right? They're married. They have children, and I would say the Army does. Is very proactive to provide support to the formations with family care. So whether it's an exceptional family member program, they have the day of schools, they have health care, chaplaincy, they do family readiness events, many family readiness events. So the chaplaincy and the Army's has been, in my experience, has been very proactive to provide support in that area.
Now, something that you had spoke about earlier, you said that as a chaplain, you guys are, I want to make sure I get this right, non-combative, or you all do not go into combat. Could you explain that so people can get an understanding of what you mean by that?
Yeah, we do go to combat, right? But we are non-combatants. So I don't bear arms, right? I don't engage in like an M4. I don't go to a firing range to qualify with a weapon because we're not combatants.
Okay.
So
chaplains when they are deployed overseas during wartime, they don't have to. They're not going in with any weapons and out there on the front line. So will they be on the front line, or would that be somewhere? Are chaplains somewhere else to provide their services to the soldiers?
Yeah, I think, because it really depends on where the chaplain is assigned. Because my first assignment was with combat aviation. And I've my experience there is I've gone on so many training flights with them. I'm in the airframe with them. I'm in that jump seat with them. So if we were in a deployed setting, I am just as vulnerable as my, the crew. So, and it's similar to maybe a chaplain who's assigned to a ground unit and, they're providing religious support, needing to head to a location to provide religious support. A chaplain is it's vulnerable. He or she is very vulnerable. Mm-hmm. I have colleagues that, they've experienced things, and thankfully God has protected them, and so, yeah.
That's great. That's great to hear. So let me ask you this, because as we were speaking about recruiting efforts and just recruiting, period. Where can people go to find more information out? Sometimes they may come talk to you and speak to you, but then sometimes it's also good for them to be able to look at stuff and read through things. So are there any websites? Are there anything that you say, hey, go check this out before you just make a decision? Go read, find out some more information, figure out some more, and then just get back with me. Where can people find that information if they're interested in learning more?
Yeah. GoArmy.com/chaplain. You can go to our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram. You can contact a chaplain recruiter. You can contact me if you'd like, and you can talk to other chaplains. Engage with other chaplains. Ask them what their experience has been like.
Your footprint is pretty much in the Chicago area. Or do you go outside of the Chicago area too?
Absolutely. So I cover 9 states.
Okay.
In the north central area, so that's North, South Dakota, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, northern part of Kentucky. So it's 9 states that we cover.
Okay.
That we recruit.
So traveling, going to different Bible colleges, seminaries, talking to students on a pretty much regular basis, huh?
Yeah, so we capitalize on virtual markets. So if you're, whether it's, LinkedIn or, a career fair that's relevant to our mission, or endorser events, church events that the denomination hosts, those are some of the primary ways we recruit.
And last thing before we get out of here, where can students who listen to this come check Chaplain Torres out? Where are your next events where you will be talking and speaking to students that you have coming up?
Yeah, so great question. One of our next events is going to be at Northwestern Theological Seminary. That's in Evanston, if you're in the Illinois area, and that's in February. And then we're I believe there's an event as well in Andrews Seminary. But if this is kind of evolving, and so if you want to just check us out on social media, we'll do our best to update that and inform you of where our whereabouts are. And
could you tell them that website one more time before you get out of here?
So facebook.com/NCCR for North Central Recruiting Team, and then goarmy.com/chaplain.
Thank you all for tuning in. This is the AMEDD Effect, the cause and effect of Army Medical Recruiting and Chaplaincy. Thank you. The causes and effects of Army medical opportunities are endless. When you join the U.S. Army Medical Department, not only will you get more out of your medical career, but you will also provide meaningful service to soldiers, their families, military retirees, and last but not least, your country. To learn more about AMEDD, visit goarmy.com/AMEDD. That's goarmy.com/AMEDD. And if you're looking for information on tuition assistance, visit goarmy.com/HPSP. That's goarmy.com/HPSP.